When people talk about globalization, most tend to think of it as a modern phenomenon, made possible by airplanes, the internet, and transcontinental shipping. But the truth is, over 2,000 years ago, the world had already begun to connect in extraordinary ways. For instance, silk from China had found its way to Rome, becoming a luxury item coveted by the Roman elite. At the same time, Roman glassware had made its way to Chang'an, the grand capital of the East at that time. That alone is enough to show that the East and West had been trading with one another far earlier than most people realize. The route that connected these far-flung lands would later be called the Silk Road. It stretched from China, across Central Asia, through Western Asia, and ended on the shores of the Mediterranean. But it wasn't merely a marketplace. It was a thoroughfare of culture, religion, and knowledge. A very early form of globalization, long before anyone had a word for it. And in today's video, we're going to trace that epic journey, a road that once linked the world during an age when most maps were still filled with blank spaces. So fasten your seatbelt as we dive into today's story. But first, you'll have incredible luck if you like and subscribe before this video ends. If you've ever wondered why it's called the Silk Road and not the Road of Gold, Spices, or Pearls, the answer is surprisingly simple. Silk was once the most treasured and coveted commodity in the ancient world. Over 5,000 years ago, the Chinese had already mastered the art of raising silkworms, extracting fine threads from their cocoons, and weaving them into shimmering fabrics as soft and radiant as moonlight. Silk wasn't just beautiful, it was exceptional. Cool in the summer, warm in the winter, it was light, breathable, yet undeniably luxurious. And that's precisely why it quickly became a symbol of status and refinement. In the beginning, silk was a privilege reserved only for emperors, officials, and the noble elite. It wasn't just fashion, it was a statement of rank and power. But as time went on, silk began to spread more widely. Merchants, explorers, and even diplomats from across the world sought every means to obtain it. And so, from humble beginnings in small Chinese villages, silk crossed mountains, deserts, and seas to become one of the most sought-after goods on the planet. It was the very reason a vast network of trade routes stretching from east to west came into existence. With its unmatched beauty and intrinsic value, silk quickly transcended its role as a luxury item to become a form of currency. That's right, in the borderlands during the Han Dynasty, where metal coins lost their value and grain spoiled easily under harsh conditions, people used bolts of silk as a medium of exchange. At that time, each length of silk carried not only material worth, but also embodied a sense of trust between individuals. And so, silk began its journey. From China, it made its way to India, crossed rocky mountains and barren deserts, continued on to the Middle East, and eventually reached the heart of Europe. In the Roman Empire, silk was more than just an object of luxury. It was an obsession among the aristocracy. Wealthy merchant families and noble households treated the possession of Chinese silk as a declaration of class and power. No one embodied this more vividly than Roman Emperor Elagabalus, who was famously known for wearing only garments made of silk, from the private chambers of his palace to official appearances before the court. And the price of silk in Rome? At times it rivaled gold, and in some cases, it was considered even more precious. In many ways, silk had moved beyond the confines of merchandise. It became a symbol of connection between civilizations, a living testament to the idea that the Silk Road carried more than just goods. It carried dreams, ambition, and the restless curiosity of a world beginning to unfold. The story of the Silk Road, in truth, did not begin with trade, but with war and politics. In 202 BCE, after defeating Xiang Yu, Liu Bang ascended the throne and established the Han Dynasty, one of the greatest dynasties in Chinese history. But just 2 years later, the Han faced a fierce threat from the north, the Xiongnu. They raided the borders, besieged fortresses, and posed a grave danger to the survival of the Central Plains. At the time, Liu Bang chose a strategy of appeasement, marrying a Han princess to the Xiongnu chieftain and offering tributes of gold, grain, and silk. It was a concession rooted in political calculation. But as the Han dynasty grew stronger, its ambitions shifted, and with that came a desire to change the balance of power. The man who laid the foundation for that shift was Zhang Qian, an envoy sent by Emperor Wu of Han to seek allies in the distant lands of the western regions. What followed was a journey almost beyond belief. Zhang Qian was captured by the Xiongnu and held for 10 years before managing to escape and resume his mission. He traveled through unfamiliar and perilous territories, from Daiwan to Sogdia, from Fergana to Kucha, and finally to Greater Yuezhi. Though he failed to secure the alliance he had hoped for, Zhang Qian returned with something far more valuable: knowledge. He meticulously recorded everything he observed about the people, their customs, goods, and most importantly, the potential for trade among cultures. These records ignited the curiosity of Chinese merchants and opened the door to an era of unprecedented connection between East and West. Interestingly, although this network of routes had existed for centuries, it wasn't until the year 1877, nearly 2 millennia later, that it was given an official name. The term Silk Road was coined by German geographer Ferdinand von Richthofen, and from that point forward, it became a lasting symbol of one of the longest, most dangerous, and most extraordinary journeys of commerce, culture, and history the world has ever known. After Zhang Qian's return, the Han Dynasty didn't stop at simply recording the outside world. Emperor Wu of Han, one of the most decisive and ambitious rulers in Chinese history, pushed westward, sending troops deep into what is now Xinjiang, where he established a governing body known as the Protectorate of the Western Regions. Securing control over this area not only stabilized the empire's borders, but also laid down a strong commercial corridor linking China with Central Asia. Caravans of merchants began traversing grasslands, towering mountains and scorching deserts, carrying silk, tea, and paper, and returning with gems, horses, spices, and countless goods from the Western world. But if the Han Dynasty were the pathfinders, then it was under the Tang Dynasty that the Silk Road reached its golden age. By the 8th century, Chang'an, the Tang capital, was not only a political center, but also the largest city in the world, a metropolis with over 1 million inhabitants, including tens of thousands of foreigners. Chang'an was, in many ways, the ancient world's equivalent of New York City, vibrant, multicultural, and brimming with energy. And the Tang didn't stop at land. Their ambitions reached out to the sea. Chinese merchant ships began sailing across the East Sea, through the Strait of Malacca and into the Indian Ocean, carrying their cargo farther than ever before. At the forefront of this maritime expansion stood Guangzhou, which rose to prominence as one of the most important seaports of its time. It became a hub where goods from across the globe converged, forging new links between China and the wider world. Though once a brilliant artery stretching across continents, the Silk Road was not immune to the fractures of history. In the year 755, a major upheaval known as the An Lushan Rebellion erupted, shaking the very foundations of the Tang Dynasty. The prolonged civil war shattered the military, and Chinese control over the western regions gradually slipped into the hands of other powers. When Tang forces were forced to withdraw from the frontier, the link between China and Central Asia through the Silk Road was all but severed. The once bustling route fell into desolation, and what seemed to be a golden age quietly faded into the past. Yet history, once again, took an unexpected turn in the early 13th century. In the year 1206, a man born on the Mongolian steppes, named Temujin, unified the nomadic tribes and declared himself Genghis Khan. From that moment, a mighty empire emerged, stretching from the Sea of Japan all the way to Eastern Europe, larger than any empire the world had ever seen. But perhaps the most remarkable surprise was that the Mongols, instead of simply destroying, chose to reconnect the Silk Road. They constructed relay stations along major trade routes, offering rest stops, fresh horses, and even travel permits for merchants. They implemented a special system of protection. Anyone holding official documents, whether a Chinese trader, a Persian missionary, or a Venetian merchant, was granted safe passage across the empire. Never before had such a vast and efficient commercial network existed in the pre-modern world. Thanks to the Mongol safeguard, the Silk Road was reborn. Caravans once again threaded their way across continents, carrying not only goods, but also stories, faiths, and innovations, rekindling the pulse of a world in motion. By the 1340s, as caravans of merchants continued to weave their way through deserts and ancient cities, something far more deadly traveled alongside them. Disease followed the same routes as trade, spreading swiftly from China into Central Asia, then sweeping through the Middle East before crashing into Europe. The result was catastrophic beyond imagination. It's estimated that nearly 1/3 of the population in both Europe and the Middle East perished. Thriving cities fell silent, economies collapsed, and people's faith in society was profoundly shaken. In the East, the Yuan dynasty was no more immune than the rest. The empire suffered not only from the plague, but also from internal strife and the simmering resistance of the Han Chinese population. These pressures soon fractured the regime, and in 1368, a new dynasty emerged, the Ming. But while the Mongols had once flung open the gates of commerce, the Ming emperors did the opposite. With a conservative worldview rooted in agrarian values, they saw foreign trade as a secondary concern. The Ming restricted borders, curbed international exchange, and allowed only a handful of ports to operate, strictly under state supervision. As a result, the Silk Road, already crippled by disease, grew even more silent. A radiant chapter in history quietly came to a close, making way for centuries of upheaval and transformation that would follow. In the year 1453, the Ottoman Empire, a rising force from the region of Anatolia, launched a campaign and captured Constantinople, the magnificent capital of the Eastern Roman Empire. With that single event, a powerful symbol of East-West civilization collapsed, and the overland trade routes across the Middle East were severed entirely. Cut off from the traditional path through the Middle East, Europe was forced to search for alternatives, and they found one, by sea. In their pursuit of a new passage to the east, an entirely different chapter began, the Age of Exploration. Through the voyages of Vasco da Gama, Columbus, and Magellan, European empires expanded their influence across the globe. They established colonies, seized control of new maritime trade routes, and ushered in a new phase of globalization, one vastly different from the world the Silk Road once connected. With the rise of oceanic navigation, the land-based Silk Road gradually faded into the background. It did not vanish completely, but it was no longer the lifeblood of global commerce. A monumental era came to a close, giving way to a world changing faster than ever before. Along the vast journey from east to west, there were cities that became resting places, not only for merchants, but also for scholars, monks, and poets. Names like Samarkand, Bukhara, Isfahan, and Dunhuang, though no longer the centers of the world today, once stood as beating hearts of learning, culture, and the arts across Eurasia. In these cities, handwritten Buddhist sutras were preserved and copied. Mosques rose beside Christian churches, and libraries opened their doors to seekers of knowledge, filled with manuscripts in Arabic, Persian, Chinese, and Sanskrit. Zoroastrianism, Judaism, Christianity, Buddhism, and Islam all once traveled side by side, flowing along the arteries of the world's greatest trade route. One of the most vivid examples of this cultural exchange is the journey of the great Chinese monk Xuanzang in the 7th century. He crossed thousands of miles through deserts, high mountains, and many kingdoms to reach India in search of sacred texts and spiritual understanding. After nearly 2 decades, he returned to China not only with scriptures, but also with an entirely new stream of thought and doctrine that helped shape the development of Mahayana Buddhism in the East. That remarkable journey would later inspire one of China's most beloved literary works, Journey to the West, where Xuanzang was transformed into the character of Tang Sanzang, who, with the aid of the mischievous Monkey King, braved countless perils in pursuit of enlightenment. Through such journeys, the Silk Road became far more than a trade route. It became a bridge between civilizations, and at times, it profoundly reshaped them through the seemingly distant ideas and beliefs they discovered on the other side of the desert. The Silk Road was never just a trade route. It was a symbol of the human desire to push beyond boundaries, to connect, to explore, and to better understand one another across civilizations that once seemed worlds apart. From the first strands of silk woven in the East to the spiritual pilgrimage of a devoted monk, from the bustling ports of Guangzhou to the vibrant markets of Constantinople, each chapter helped compose a story that spanned over 1,000 years. If today's story gave you pause to reflect on the forgotten threads that once tied us together, or inspired you to explore more of our shared human history, don't hesitate to share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you'd like to continue this journey with us through the untold stories of the past, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. We'll see you in the next adventure.